Gren Russo built his empire on blood, silence, and absolute control. To the New York underworld, he was a phantom who traded in fear. To Beatrice Gallagher, a deeply indebted, overweight maid who scrubbed his marble floors, he was a terrifying boss to be avoided at all costs. She was invisible, hiding beneath oversized uniforms, surviving paycheck to paycheck. But the night Beatrice broke the cardinal rule of the Russo estate and entered the forbidden West Wing, she didn't just find a secret. She found Grainer's deeply guarded vulnerability. What happened next shattered the boundaries of their worlds, unraveling a deadly conspiracy and a forbidden romance that no one saw coming. Beatrice Gallagher was used to being unseen. At 240 pounds, society had a funny way of either staring at her with overt judgment or looking right through her, as if she were a piece of inconvenient furniture. She had learned early on to shrink herself, to walk softly, to speak only when spoken to. It was a survival mechanism that served her well in her 28 years of life, especially now, drowning in $50,000 of debt left behind by her late father's aggressive, unsuccessful cancer treatments. She needed a lifeline, and she found it in the classifieds under a discreet listing for a live-in domestic engineer. The address was a sprawling, fortress-like estate in the secluded cliffs of Sands Point, Long Island. The interview had been conducted by a stern, sharp-featured woman named Mrs. Gable, who looked at Beatrice's heavy frame with immediate disdain. "The work is grueling," Mrs. Gable had warned, her eyes darting to Beatrice's waistline. "We need someone with stamina. The Russo estate requires perfection. Dirt does not exist here. Imperfection does not exist here." "I am a hard worker, ma'am," Beatrice had replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I don't tire easily, and I am very thorough." Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps Mrs. Gable figured a woman like Beatrice would be too timid to snoop, but she got the job. The pay was astronomical, triple what she had made cleaning hotel rooms in Queens, but it came with an ironclad non-disclosure agreement and a set of rules that bordered on militant. Rule number 1. No personal cell phones outside of quarters. Rule number 2. Never make eye contact with the master of the house or his associates. Rule number 3, the most absolute of all. The entire second floor of the West Wing is strictly forbidden. Any staff found crossing the threshold of the oak doors at the end of the grand hallway will be terminated immediately. And, as Mrs. Gable ominously added, terminated in ways you cannot afford to imagine. For the first 3 months, Beatrice was a ghost. She scrubbed the imported Italian marble until her knees bruised. She polished the mahogany banisters and cleaned the sprawling guest rooms. She learned the rhythms of the house. The men who visited were large, wearing tailored suits that couldn't quite hide the bulges of weapons at their sides. They spoke in hushed, gritty tones. Names like Salvatore Sal Maroni and Frank Moretti floated in the air, men who Beatrice had read about in the metro section of the paper, usually accompanied by words like indictment or racketeering. And then there was Gren Russo. He was the master of the house, a man whose presence dropped the temperature of a room by 10 degrees. Beatrice had only caught glimpses of him, broad shoulders, jet-black hair slightly silvering at the temples, and eyes the color of flint. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator. Whenever he entered a room, Beatrice immediately averted her eyes and found an excuse to slip away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified of him. Everyone was. Despite the fear, the estate provided a strange sort of sanctuary for Beatrice. She had her own small room in the servants' quarters. Meals were provided. Her paychecks were steadily chipping away at the crushing debt. She was surviving. She kept her head down, her uniform crisp, and her mouth shut. She thought she had figured out the perfect rhythm of invisibility. But the Russo estate was a house built on secrets. and secrets, much like water, always find a way to seep through the cracks. It happened on a Tuesday in late November. A massive nor'easter had rolled in off the Atlantic, battering the Long Island coast with driving rain and howling winds. Downstairs, Gren was hosting what Mrs. Gable called a board meeting. The tension in the house was palpable. A dozen black SUVs were parked in the circular driveway. Thick cigar smoke wafted up the grand staircase. Beatrice was assigned to the second-floor east wing, tasked with dusting the endless rows of antique bookshelves. The storm raged outside, the thunder vibrating through the thick stone walls of the mansion. Around midnight, a particularly vicious crack of thunder shook the estate, plunging the house into darkness for a brief, terrifying second before the backup generators kicked in. In that moment of silence between the thunder and the hum of the generators, Beatrice heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a human sound, a frail, panicked wailing. She froze, her dusting cloth clutched in her plump hand. She listened closely. The sound came again, a high-pitched sob that tugged at something deep within Beatrice's chest. It was the sound of utter, helpless terror. She stepped out of the library and into the long, dimly lit hallway. The cries were coming from the other side. The West Wing. Beatrice hesitated. Rule number 3. Terminated immediately. She pictured Graine Rousseau's cold, dead eyes. She pictured losing her job, the debt collectors calling, the eviction notices. She took a step backward toward the safety of the East Wing. But then, another cry echoed, followed by the sound of glass shattering. Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't ignore it. She had watched her own father wither away in a hospital bed, terrified and confused in his final days. Her empathy, a fatal flaw in a house of ruthless criminals, overrode her fear of Graine Rousseau. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound as she hurried down the hall, crossing the invisible boundary into the forbidden territory. The West Wing was noticeably different. It felt clinical. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. The cries were coming from a set of double doors at the very end of the corridor. Beatrice pushed them open. The room was vast and shadowed. In the center was a large hospital-style bed. On the floor, beside a shattered water pitcher, sat an elderly woman. She was incredibly frail, her silver hair wild, her thin nightgown soaked from the spilled water. She was trembling violently, her hands clutching at her ears as she sobbed. "Mama!" The woman wept, her eyes wide and unseeing. "Mama! The storm! They're bombing us again! Mama!" Dementia. Beatrice recognized the signs instantly. The woman was trapped in a terrifying loop of her past, triggered by the thunder. Beatrice didn't think about the rules. She didn't think about where she was. She dropped to her knees, the fabric of her skirt pulling tight across her heavy thighs, and carefully approached the woman. "Shh, sweetie, it's okay," Beatrice murmured, keeping her voice low, soft, and melodic. "It's just the rain. You're safe." The old woman flinched, shrinking back. The planes are coming." "No planes," Beatrice said gently, reaching out slowly. She didn't grab the woman. She offered her hand, palm up, a gesture of absolute surrender. "Just a thunderstorm. Look at me. My name is Bay. I'm right here with you." The old woman's panicked eyes met Beatrice's round, soft face. There was something maternal and incredibly grounding about Beatrice. Her weight, which she had always viewed as a curse, gave her a solid, immovable presence in the room. She was an anchor in the old woman's storm. Hesitantly, the frail hand reached out and grasped Beatrice's thick, warm fingers. "There you go," Beatrice cooed. She slowly shimmied closer, eventually wrapping her soft, plush arms around the shivering woman. She pulled her into her chest, rocking her gently. "I've got you. You're safe here. Nobody is going to hurt you." Beatrice began to hum a quiet, old Irish lullaby her grandmother used to sing. The vibrations of her chest, the warmth of her body, and the soothing melody worked like magic. The old woman's rigid muscles began to relax. Her sobbing hitched, turning into soft sniffles, and she buried her face into Beatrice's soft shoulder. "Are you an angel?" the old woman whispered, her voice fragile. "Just a maid, sweetheart." "Just a maid," Beatrice whispered back, stroking the woman's silver hair. Neither of them heard the heavy oak doors swing open. "Get your hands off her!" The voice was a lethal, quiet hiss that sliced through the room. Beatrice froze, the blood draining from her face. She slowly turned her head. Standing in the doorway, drenched in the shadows of the dim room, was Graine Russo. His chest was heaving beneath his tailored dress shirt, a suppressed panic in his posture. And in his right hand, pointed directly at Beatrice's head, was a matte black, semi-automatic pistol. Beatrice couldn't breathe. Her heart stopped. "This is it," she thought. "I'm going to die." But she didn't let go of the old woman. Instinctively, Beatrice curled her large body forward, acting as a human shield over the frail figure in her arms. Grenne's finger was on the trigger. He had rushed upstairs the moment his security team informed him a staff member had breached the West Wing. He fully expected an assassin sent by the Maroney family. He expected to find his mother, Isabella, dead. Instead, he found the overweight, quiet maid from the East Wing, shielding his mother with her own body. "Graine?" The old woman peeked out from behind Beatrice's arm. Her voice was lucid, calm. "Put that nasty thing away. You're scaring my angel." Graine lowered the gun, his flint-colored eyes widening in absolute shock. For the past 6 months, Isabella Russo's Alzheimer's had been so severe that she hadn't recognized her own son. She had been violent, inconsolable, and trapped in night terrors. He had hired the best private nurses in New York, and they had all quit or been fired because they couldn't handle her episodes. Yet here she was, coherent and calm, held in the arms of a maid who was supposed to be scrubbing baseboards. Graine stared at Beatrice. For the first time, he really looked at her. He saw the terror in her wide, hazel eyes. He saw the way she was shaking, yet refusing to abandon her protective stance over his mother. He saw the soft, round curves of her face, devoid of makeup, and the way her heavy chest rose and fell in panic. He slipped the gun into the holster at his waist. "Help her back into bed," Graine ordered, his voice devoid of emotion, though a storm raged in his eyes. Beatrice scrambled to obey, her legs feeling like jelly. She gently guided Isabella back into the sheets, pulling the heavy duvet over her. "Will you stay, Bay?" Isabella asked, gripping Beatrice's hand. Beatrice looked back at Graine, terrified. "Tell her you'll be here," Graine commanded softly. "I'll be right here," Beatrice lied, her voice cracking. Once Isabella's eyes fluttered shut, slipping into a peaceful sleep, Graine turned to the door. "My office. Now." The walk to Graine's private study felt like a march to the executioner's block. Beatrice's uniform was damp with Isabella's spilled water, clinging uncomfortably to her thick thighs. She kept her head bowed as she stepped into the opulent, dark-paneled room. Graine sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He didn't offer her a seat. He simply stared at her in silence for what felt like an eternity. The ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a bomb counting down. Finally, he tossed a thick manila folder onto the desk. "Beatrice Gallagher," he read, leaning back in his leather chair. 28 years old, born in Queens, unmarried, no criminal record, $52,000 in debt to various medical institutions and high-interest lenders. Previous employment, 3 years as a housekeeper at the St. Regis, let go due to corporate downsizing. Beatrice swallowed hard. He had a complete dossier on her. Why were you in the West Wing? Grene asked, his tone deadly calm. I heard her crying, Mr. Russo, Beatrice stammered, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. I heard a crash. I thought someone was hurt. You were informed of the rules? I was. I'm sorry, I couldn't ignore someone in pain. My father, he used to get confused before he passed. He would cry out. I couldn't just walk away. Grene studied her. In his world, everyone had an angle. People were motivated by greed, fear, or power. He searched Beatrice's flushed, round face for deception, but found only genuine terror and an overwhelming, raw empathy. It baffled him. The women I hire to care for my mother are highly trained medical professionals, Grene said, steepling his fingers. They charge $2,000 a night. And yet, she attacks them. She screams. She hasn't slept through the night in 4 months, and she hasn't recognized my face since May. He leaned forward, his eyes piercing hers. What did you do to her? Nothing, Beatrice gasped, taking a step back. I swear, I just held her. I sang to her. Sometimes, people who are lost in their own minds just need an anchor. They need to feel grounded. They don't need clinical words. They need humanity. Silence stretched between them again. Grene stood up, walking around the desk. Beatrice tensed, preparing for a blow, or worse. He stopped inches from her. She could smell his cologne, cedarwood and something distinctly metallic, like ozone before a storm. He was a foot taller than her, a towering wall of muscle and menace. You are no longer a maid in the East Wing, Miss Gallagher, Grene stated. Tears pricked Beatrice's eyes. Please, Mr. Russo. I need this job. I'll never go back there. I won't say a word to anyone. You misunderstand me, Grene interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. You are no longer a maid, because as of tonight, you are my mother's primary private caretaker. Beatrice's jaw dropped. What? But I'm not a nurse. I don't have medical training. I have doctors for her medical needs. What I need is someone to keep her calm, someone she trusts. Grene looked back toward the door, a rare flash of exhaustion crossing his hardened features. She called you an angel. She smiled. I haven't seen her smile in a year. He turned back to Beatrice, his expression hardening back into the ruthless Mafia Boss. Here is the new arrangement. You will move out of the servants' quarters and into the suite adjoining my mother's room. You will be on call 24 hours a day. Your salary will be quadrupled. I will personally clear your $52,000 debt by tomorrow morning. Beatrice's breath hitched. Debt-free. It was a miracle, but the catch was hanging in the air. However, Grene continued, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head all the way back to look at him. You belong to this wing now. You do not leave the estate. You do not speak to the other staff about what goes on in those rooms. If my mother is distressed, you fix it. If you try to run, or if you breathe a word of my mother's condition to the outside world. He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. I understand, Beatrice whispered. Good. Go pack your things. Over the next month, Beatrice's life transformed into a bizarre, gilded captivity. The suite she moved into was luxurious, larger than her entire apartment in Queens. Her new duties were strictly tied to Isabella Russo. It was demanding work. Isabella's moods swung wildly. Some days she thought Beatrice was her childhood friend from Sicily. Other days, she just knew Beatrice was her angel. Beatrice bathed her, brushed her silver hair, and fed her. Because of Beatrice's soft, unhurried nature, Isabella ate more than she had in months. Beatrice's own weight, the very thing she had been ridiculed for her entire life, became her greatest asset. When Isabella was frightened, she would bury herself in Beatrice's soft embrace, finding comfort in the plush, warm safety of her caretaker. During this time, Beatrice's proximity to Gran shifted. He visited his mother every evening. At first, Beatrice would retreat to the corners of the room, keeping her head down. But Isabella demanded her presence, forcing Gran and Beatrice to sit together by the bedside. Beatrice watched the ruthless underboss of the New York Mafia transform into a devoted, heartbroken son. He would hold his mother's frail hand, reading Italian poetry to her. Sometimes, when Isabella was asleep, Beatrice would catch Gran looking at her. It wasn't the look of a predator anymore. It was an intense, analyzing gaze that made a strange heat pool in Beatrice's stomach. He noticed things about her. He ordered the kitchen to prepare meals specifically for her, making sure she ate alongside his mother. He brought her books from the library. He never commented on her size, but the way his eyes tracked her movements, slow, deliberate, made her feel surprisingly seen. Not as furniture, but as a woman. But the peace of the West Wing was an illusion. It began subtly in week 5. Beatrice was cleaning up Isabella's dinner tray. Isabella's personal physician, Dr. Gladys Pendleton, a slick, highly paid concierge doctor, had visited earlier that afternoon, leaving behind a new batch of sleep aid tea he insisted Isabella drink daily. Beatrice took the empty porcelain teacup to wash it in the suite's small kitchenette. As she rinsed it under the hot water, she noticed a strange, chalky white residue crusted at the bottom of the cup. It didn't smell like chamomile or valerian root. It smelled faintly chemical, almost metallic. Beatrice frowned, scraping a bit onto her finger. She thought back to the past few days. Isabella had been more lethargic since starting the tea. Not calm, but heavily sedated. Her skin had taken on a greyish pallor, and her lucid moments had vanished entirely. A cold dread settled in Beatrice's chest. She remembered her father's medication mix-ups in the hospital. She knew what heavy sedatives looked like. This wasn't tea. Someone is poisoning her, Beatrice realized, the teacup trembling in her hands. But who? The doctor? The staff? Or Grene himself? She looked toward the door connecting her suite to the main hallway. She was a prisoner in a house of killers, holding a secret that could get her murdered. The invisible walls of the Russo estate had just closed in on her, and Beatrice Gallagher was suddenly in the most dangerous position of her life. For 3 agonizing days, Beatrice played a terrifying game of Russian roulette with Isabella Russo's life. The chalky residue at the bottom of the teacup haunted her every waking moment. If Grena was the one ordering the poisoning, going to him meant signing her own death warrant. If it was someone else, and Beatrice failed to stop it, Isabella would die. The only choice she had was a quiet, desperate rebellion. When Dr. Gladys Pendleton arrived on Thursday afternoon, bringing his fresh supply of specialty sleep aid tea in small, unmarked foil packets, Beatrice accepted them with a submissive nod and lowered eyes. Pendleton, a man whose expensive cologne couldn't mask the sour arrogance radiating from him, barely looked at her. "Make sure she drinks the entire cup, Beatrice," Pendleton ordered, snapping his medical bag shut. "Her neural pathways are deteriorating rapidly. This blend soothes the agitation. If you skip a dose, her violent outbursts will return, and Mr. Russo will hold you personally responsible. Am I understood?" "Yes, Dr. Pendleton," Beatrice murmured, keeping her hands clasped tightly over her apron to hide their shaking. The moment his polished wingtips clicked down the marble hallway and out of the West Wing, Beatrice moved. She took the foil packet, dumped the pale, chemically laced powder into a small glass vial she had smuggled from the kitchen spice rack, and hid it deep within her uniform pocket. Instead, she brewed Isabella a simple cup of organic chamomile and honey. The results were undeniable. By Friday morning, the greyish pallor had vanished from Isabella's cheeks. The heavy, dead-eyed sedation was replaced by a sharp, albeit fragile, awareness. She sat up in bed, looking around the opulent room with startling clarity. "Bay," Isabella said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. She looked down at her own hands, tracing the blue veins. "My mind feels lighter. The fog is lifting." Beatrice sat on the edge of the mattress, her heavy weight dipping the springs, providing a comforting, grounding presence for the older woman. "That's wonderful news, Mrs. Russo." Isabella reached out, her thin fingers gripping Beatrice's plump wrist. "Isabella. Call me Isabella, child. You are the only real thing in this mausoleum." Her sharp eyes darted toward the mahogany door. "They think I don't know what is happening. My memory comes in flashes, Bea. Terrible flashes." Beatrice's heart pounded. "Flashes of what?" Before Isabella could answer, the heavy oak doors swung open. Grene stepped into the room, flanked by two of his massive, silent enforcers. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, his collar unbuttoned to reveal the dark hair on his chest. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his flint-colored eyes deep and bruised. But as he looked at the bed, he froze. Isabella was sitting completely upright. She wasn't staring at the wall. She wasn't screaming about airplanes or crying for her mother. She looked directly at her son. "Graine," Isabella said clearly. "You look tired, mio caro." Graine's breath hitched. He waved a hand, dismissing the guards, who immediately backed out and closed the doors. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees beside the bed. He took his mother's face in his large, scarred hands, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "Mama," he whispered, his voice thick with a vulnerability he never showed the world. "You know me?" "Of course I know you, you foolish boy," she scolded gently, though her eyes filled with tears. "You work too hard. You're carrying too much." Beatrice quietly stood up, intending to give them privacy, but as she moved to slip away, Gren's hand shot out. His long fingers wrapped around her thick forearm. The grip wasn't bruising, but it was absolute. "Stay," he commanded softly, not taking his eyes off his mother. Beatrice stayed, her skin burning where his fingers held her. He eventually let go, spending the next hour talking quietly with Isabella. For the first time, Beatrice saw the man beneath the monster. He was tender, attentive, and fiercely protective. It made the vial of powder burning a hole in Beatrice's pocket feel 10 times heavier. Later that afternoon, Dr. Pendleton returned for an unannounced check-in. Beatrice was in the adjoining suite, sorting laundry, when she heard his sharp voice echoing in Isabella's room. "What do you mean she's alert?" Pendleton was hissing, apparently speaking to one of the outside guards before entering. Beatrice crept to the ajar door, holding her breath. Pendleton stepped into Isabella's room, finding her asleep naturally. He checked her pulse, his brow furrowed in deep irritation. He pulled out his cell phone, dialing a number. Beatrice pressed her ear to the crack in the door. "It's Gladys," Pendleton muttered into the phone. "There's a problem. The old woman is building a tolerance, or the maid is interfering. She was lucid this morning. Grene saw her. Yes, I know the timeline. If she regains her memory, Silas, she's going to remember the offshore transfers. She caught you skimming from the family accounts before the dementia peaked. If Grene finds out you stole $10 million, he'll skin us both alive." Beatrice slapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Silas Romano, Grene's cousin and his second-in-command. Silas was the one bleeding the Russo empire dry, and he was using Pendleton to keep Isabella chemically lobotomized so she couldn't expose him. "I'll double the dose," Pendleton whispered aggressively into the receiver. "Just keep Grene distracted. And if the fat maid gets in the way, I'll deal with her myself." Pendleton hung up. Beatrice scrambled back from the door, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, terrifyingly loud in her own ears. She was completely out of her depth. This wasn't just a medical mix-up. This was a high-level mafia conspiracy, and she was standing right in the crosshairs. Midnight draped the Russo estate in heavy, oppressive silence. Outside, the wind howled off the Long Island Sound, rattling the reinforced glass of the mansion's windows. Beatrice paced her suite. Her uniform felt suffocating. The vial of white powder sat on her bedside table, mocking her. She had a choice to make. She could pack her meager belongings, slip out the servant's entrance, and disappear into the night. Grain had paid her debt. She was free to start over. But leaving meant Isabella would be at the mercy of Pendleton and Silas. Leaving meant the only woman who had ever looked at her with pure, maternal kindness would be slowly poisoned to death. And then there was Grana. Beatrice thought of the way his thumb had stroked his mother's cheek. She thought of the way his dark eyes had watched her, not with disgust or dismissal, but with a strange, heavy intensity that made her blood heat. She couldn't leave them to the wolves. Grabbing the glass vial, Beatrice slipped out of the West Wing. The mansion was dark, the security detail mostly patrolling the perimeter. She padded softly in her rubber-soled shoes down the grand staircase, heading toward the east corridor where Grena's private study was located. A line of golden light bled from beneath the heavy mahogany door. Beatrice raised her trembling fist and knocked twice. "Enter." The voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Beatrice pushed the door open. The study was bathed in the warm glow of a single desk lamp and the dying embers of a fireplace. Grena sat behind his desk, an empty tumbler of amber liquid beside a mountain of ledgers. He had his suit jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faded tattoos. When he looked up and saw Beatrice, his eyes narrowed. "What's wrong? Is it my mother?" He was on his feet instantly. "She's sleeping," Beatrice said quickly, her voice a nervous squeak. She stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. "Mr. Russo, Grene, I need to show you something. And I need you to promise me you won't shoot me before I explain." Grena paused, his posture relaxing only slightly. He walked slowly around the desk, stopping a few feet away from her. The sheer size of him made the spacious room feel suddenly claustrophobic. "I don't make a habit of shooting women who save my mother's life," he said quietly. "Show me." Beatrice reached into her pocket and pulled out the small glass vial, placing it on the edge of his desk. Grena looked at it, then back at her. "What is this?" "It's the tea," Beatrice whispered, her voice shaking. "Dr. Pendleton's specialty blend. He brings it in foil packets. I noticed a chemical residue a few days ago. I stopped giving it to her. That's why she woke up today. That's why she recognized you." Grena stared at the vial. The air in the room suddenly turned freezing cold. It wasn't a physical drop in temperature, but a manifestation of the pure, lethal malice radiating from the man in front of her. "You're telling me," Grain said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper, "that Gladys Pendleton has been poisoning my mother?" "Yes," Beatrice said, tears welling in her eyes. "But it's not just him. I overheard him on the phone today. He was talking to Silas." Grain's head snapped up, his eyes flashing like lightning in a dark sky. "Silas." Pendleton said. "He said Silas has been skimming from your accounts. $10 million. He said your mother found out before her dementia got bad, and that the powder is to keep her quiet, keep her mind broken so she can't tell you." The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice watched a terrifying war play out across Gren's face. Shock, betrayal, and finally, a cold, calculating rage that promised absolute destruction. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. The stillness of his anger was far more horrifying. He picked up the vial, staring at the white powder. Then he looked at Beatrice. He looked at her trembling hands, her flushed cheeks, the heavy, soft curves of her body hidden beneath the drab maid's uniform. "Do you know what you've done, coming to me with this?" Grainer asked softly, stepping into her personal space. "If you had been wrong, I would have killed you. If you had gone to the wrong guard with this information, Silas would have killed you." "Why didn't you just run, Beatrice?" "Because she didn't deserve it," Beatrice choked out, a tear spilling over her lashes and tracking down her round cheek. "And neither do you." Grainer exhaled a harsh breath. He reached out, and to Beatrice's utter shock, his large, calloused hands spanned her thick waist. He pulled her flush against him. She gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to rest on his solid, muscular chest. "In my world," Grain murmured, his face inches from hers, his eyes dropping to her lips. "Women are sharp. They are ambitious, deceitful, and thin as knives. Every person in my life wants something from me. But you—" He lifted one hand, his thumb gently wiping the tear from her cheek. "You are just good. You are soft, Beatrice. And you are the bravest goddamn woman I have ever met." Beatrice's mind went blank. The heat radiating from his body was intoxicating. His hands gripped her curves with a possessive strength that made her knees weak. He wasn't disgusted by her size. He was anchoring himself to it. "Grainer," she breathed, entirely forgetting her place. He leaned down, and his lips brushed hers. It was a hesitant, shockingly tender touch that sent a jolt of electricity straight to Beatrice's core. But before the kiss could deepen, before she could melt entirely against him, crack! The sound of shattering glass echoed from the west side of the estate, followed immediately by the unmistakable staccato burst of automatic gunfire. Grainer's head snapped toward the door, the tender lover vanishing in a millisecond, replaced by the apex predator. The estate's perimeter alarms began shrieking, a piercing, mechanical wail that tore through the night. "Silas!" Grainer snarled. He knows Pendleton's cover is blown. He grabbed Beatrice by the arm, dragging her behind the massive oak desk, just as the study doors burst open. The heavy oak doors of the study splintered inward with a deafening crash. Two men dressed in black tactical gear spilled into the room, their suppressed submachine guns sweeping the dimly lit space. They weren't Grain's loyal soldiers. They wore the silver serpent pins of Silas Romano's private faction. This was a coup, executed in the dead of night. Behind the massive mahogany desk, Beatrice crouched on the plush Persian rug, her hands clamped over her ears to block out the shrieking perimeter alarms. Her heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. Grain didn't hesitate. The tender, vulnerable man who had just kissed her vanished, replaced entirely by the lethal apex predator who ruled the New York underworld. He drew his matte black pistol from his shoulder holster in a blur of motion. Thwip. Thwip. Two silenced shots echoed through the study. The first attacker dropped instantly, a neat crimson hole appearing in the center of his forehead. The second man managed to fire a wild spray of bullets that shredded the leather back of Grainer's chair, sending a flurry of stuffing and wood splinters raining down on Beatrice. Grainer stepped smoothly out from cover, his face an emotionless mask of pure violence, and fired twice into the second man's chest. The attacker crumpled against the doorframe, dead before he hit the marble floor. The silence that followed in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant, chaotic gunfire echoing from the east wing and the relentless wail of the alarms. "Beatrice!" Grainer's voice was a harsh, commanding bark. He crouched beside her, his large hands gripping her shaking shoulders. "Look at me." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing in pure terror. She was a maid from Queens. She polished silver. She didn't dodge bullets. "Bay, look at me," Grenna ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. She forced her hazel eyes open. Grenna's face was inches from hers, his flint-colored eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying intensity. "They are coming for my mother," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Silas knows Pendleton failed to keep her sedated. If Isabella can testify to the heads of the 5 families about the 10 million Silas stole, Silas is a dead man. He's going to eliminate the only witness. Beatrice's breath hitched. "Isabella!" "I have to get to the West Wing," Grainer said, checking the magazine of his pistol. "I need you to stay here. Lock the door. Do not make a sound until I come back for you." He stood up to leave, but Beatrice grabbed the sleeve of his dark dress shirt. Her fingers, thick and trembling, dug into the expensive fabric. The thought of Isabella, sweet, frail Isabella, facing these monsters alone, ignited a fire deep within Beatrice's chest that burned hotter than her fear. She had spent her entire life shrinking, hiding her size, trying to be invisible. But tonight, she realized her size was an anchor. She was strong. "I'm coming with you," Beatrice said, her voice shaking but resolute. Grenna stared at her, stunned. "It's a war zone out there. You will get killed." "She trusts me," Beatrice argued, scrambling to her feet. The adrenaline was making her lightheaded, but she stood tall, her heavy frame imposing in the dim light. If she wakes up to gunfire, she'll panic. She'll run into the crossfire. You know she will. She needs her angel. For a fraction of a second, a look of profound awe crossed Grainer Russo's hardened features. He looked at this woman, a woman society deemed undesirable, a woman buried in debt and forced to scrub floors, and saw the courage of a lioness. "Stay right behind me," Gren growled. "If I tell you to get down, you drop. Understood?" "Understood." They slipped out of the study and into the sprawling, shadowed corridors of the estate. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and the metallic tang of blood. Bodies of Grainer's loyal guards littered the grand foyer. Silas had coordinated this perfectly. He had bought off half the security detail. Grainer moved with terrifying efficiency, a phantom of death in a tailored suit. He dispatched 3 more of Silas's men in the east hallway with ruthless precision, shielding Beatrice with his own broad body at every turn. Beatrice followed close behind, her rubber-soled Maid shoes making no sound on the imported marble. She kept her eyes focused on the broad expanse of Grain's back, breathing in the scent of cedarwood and gunpowder. When they finally breached the heavy double doors of the West Wing, the silence was chilling. "The guards stationed here are gone," Gran whispered, pressing his back against the wall. They crept toward Isabella's suite. The door was ajar. A sliver of warm, yellow light spilled out into the dark hallway. From inside, a voice hissed in panic. "Hold her still, damn it! She's fighting!" It was Dr. Gladys Pendleton. Beatrice didn't wait for Grainer's command. The maternal, protective instinct that had driven her to shield Isabella weeks ago overrode any rational thought. She shoved past Grainer, throwing her entire 240-pound weight against the heavy oak door, bursting into the room. Inside, the scene was a nightmare. Isabella was awake, thrashing wildly against the silk sheets. Standing over her was a man in a tailored silver suit, Silas Romano. He had one hand clamped brutally over Isabella's mouth, pinning her frail shoulders down. On the other side of the bed stood Dr. Pendleton, his hands shaking violently as he tried to uncap a large, wicked-looking syringe filled with a cloudy fluid. "Get off her!" Beatrice screamed, a primal, guttural sound that tore from her throat. Pendleton's head snapped up. In his momentary shock at seeing the overweight maid charging him, he fumbled the syringe. Beatrice didn't stop. She used her momentum, her mass, and every ounce of her protective fury. She crashed into Dr. Pendleton like a freight train. The impact sent the slender, arrogant doctor flying backward. He crashed through the glass coffee table, shattering it into 1,000 pieces, the syringe skittering uselessly across the floor. "You stupid bitch!" Silas roared, letting go of Isabella and reaching for the gun tucked into the waistband of his trousers. "Don't even breathe, Silas." The voice was a whisper, but it echoed like thunder in the room. Grainer stepped out of the shadows, his gun leveled directly at his cousin's head. The safety clicked off, the sound deafening in the sudden stillness. Silas froze, his hand hovering inches from his weapon. He looked at Grainer, a slick sheen of sweat breaking out over his forehead. He tried to construct a mask of innocence, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. "Grainer," Silas stammered, raising his hand slowly in surrender. "Thank God you're here. Pendleton." He went rogue. He was trying to overdose Aunt Isabella. "I came in to stop him." "Save it," Grainer cut him off, his voice dead and devoid of any familial warmth. "I know about the 10 million, Silas. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. And I know you've been chemically lobotomizing my mother for 6 months to cover your tracks." Silas's face drained of color. He looked frantically at Pendleton, who was groaning on the floor, bleeding heavily from the glass shards embedded in his arms, pinned beneath Beatrice's heavy, unyielding foot. Beatrice stood over the doctor, breathing heavily, her fists clenched, looking like an avenging angel in a crumpled apron. "She told you," Silas sneered, his gaze shifting to Isabella, who was sobbing quietly on the bed. The crazy old bat finally remembered. "No," Grainer said softly, his eyes flicking to Beatrice. "My maid told me. The woman you thought was too insignificant to notice. The woman who saw exactly what you were doing to my family." Silas let out a dark, bitter laugh. "A fat maid brings down the Romano Empire. How poetic. But you're too late, Dom. My men control the perimeter. The rest of the families are arriving in 20 minutes. I told them you went crazy, that you shot your own mother in a paranoid delusion. I take the throne tonight." "You take nothing but a bullet," Grainer said. In a desperate, lightning-fast move, Silas lunged not for his gun, but for Isabella, intending to use the frail woman as a human shield. But Beatrice was closer. With a speed that defied her size, Beatrice threw herself across the bed, wrapping her large, soft arms around Isabella, burying the old woman beneath her protective bulk. Silas's hand scrambled, grabbing the back of Beatrice's uniform instead. He yanked hard, pulling a hidden stiletto knife from his sleeve, raising it to plunge into Beatrice's exposed back. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Silas staggered backward. He looked down in disbelief at the blossoming red stain in the center of his chest. He dropped the knife, his knees buckling. He hit the floor with a heavy, final thud, his eyes staring blankly at the ornate ceiling. Silence descended on the room, broken only by Pendleton's pathetic whimpers and the sound of Beatrice's ragged breathing. Grainer slowly lowered his weapon. He keyed the radio clipped to his belt. "This is Rousseau. The usurper is dead. Secure the perimeter. Anyone wearing a silver serpent pin is to be executed on sight. Clean this up." He didn't wait for a response. He tossed the radio onto the bed and crossed the room in 2 strides. He kicked the gun away from Silas's dead hand, then turned his attention to Beatrice. She was still draped over Isabella, trembling violently, her eyes squeezed tightly shut, expecting the sting of a knife that never came. "Bea," Grainer whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he hadn't felt in a decade. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Beatrice gasped, flinching, before she realized it was him. She slowly pulled back, revealing Isabella, who was shaken but completely unharmed, her silver hair perfectly pristine against Beatrice's soft, tear-stained shoulder. "My angel," Isabella wept, reaching up to cup Beatrice's face. "You saved me." Grenna bypassed the bleeding doctor on the floor entirely. He reached down, slipping his strong arms around Beatrice's waist, and physically hoisted her off the bed. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. He didn't care about the blood, the dirt, or the chaos around them. He held her tight, his heart hammering against hers, fully realizing that this beautiful, fiercely protective woman had just saved everything he loved. "Are you hurt?" Grain demanded, pulling back slightly to examine her face, his hands running frantically over her arms and torso, checking for wounds. "No," Beatrice breathed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay. I'm okay." Grain let out a shuddering breath. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "You are never wearing a maid's uniform again, Beatrice Gallagher. Never." 2 months later, the Russo estate in Sands Point was quiet, the scars of the siege meticulously repaired. The Long Island Sound shimmered under the golden light of a late spring sunset. Beatrice stood on the sprawling balcony of the master suite, wearing a flowing, emerald-green silk dress that perfectly accentuated her soft, lush curves. The crushing weight of her $52,000 debt was gone, wiped out in a single keystroke. But she hadn't left the estate. She felt a pair of strong, familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind. Grenna pulled her back against his broad, solid chest, resting his chin on her shoulder. "My mother is asking for you," Grenna murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the side of her neck. "She says the new nurses are too skinny and they don't know how to sing." Beatrice laughed, a rich, melodic sound that echoed over the balcony. "I'll go read to her in a minute." Grenna turned her around in his arms, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The ruthless Mafia Boss was still there, the man who ruled the Underworld with an iron fist. But when he looked at Beatrice, he was entirely, hopelessly disarmed. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I have a meeting with the heads of the 5 families tonight," Grenna said quietly. "I want you by my side, Be. Not in the shadows. Not hiding. I want them to see the woman who saved the Russo Empire." Beatrice's breath hitched. She looked down at her heavy frame, a lifetime of insecurities flaring up. "Grenna, those men, their wives, they are all so perfect. They'll look at me and they'll judge you." Grenna's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to look up at him. "Let them look," Grenna said, his voice a fierce, possessive vow. "Let them see the woman who took down a usurper. Let them see the woman who holds my heart. You are the most beautiful, terrifyingly brave creature I have ever known, Beatrice. You are my queen. And anyone who looks at you with anything less than absolute reverence will answer to me." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising kiss that left no room for doubt. Beatrice melted against him, her soft hands sliding up to grip the lapels of his tailored suit. In the arms of the most dangerous man in New York, the invisible, overweight maid finally realized her true power. She wasn't just seen. She was worshipped. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Beatrice Gallagher knew she would never shrink herself for anyone, ever again. Beatrice's journey from a terrified, invisible maid burdened by debt and societal judgment to the formidable matriarch of the Russo Empire is a testament to the undeniable power of empathy and courage. In a world defined by superficiality, betrayal, and ruthless violence, her soft heart and unyielding protective instincts became her greatest armor. Graine Russo, a man hardened by blood and power, found his ultimate salvation not in weapons or wealth, but in the unwavering strength of a woman who refused to let cruelty win. Their twisted, dangerous path forged an unbreakable bond, proving that true value lies not in the shape of one's body, but in the depth and resilience of one's soul. Beatrice didn't just survive the Mafia's deadly game. She rewrote the rules entirely, claiming her rightful place beside the man who finally saw her worth.